The first time Ruth Calder saw Caleb Voss, she thought he looked like something the mountains had spit out and forgotten to take back. It was late September, the kind of afternoon where the light came in gold and slanted, turning the dust on Main Street into something almost pretty. Ruth was walking fast, head down, a bundle of mended shirts tucked under one arm. She had 4 more deliveries before sundown, and Mrs. Garrett had already complained twice about a crooked hem that wasn't crooked at all. She didn't mean to look up, but the street had gone quiet in a way that made her spine straighten, the kind of quiet that came before trouble or gossip, and in Red Hollow, those were usually the same thing. That's when she saw him. He stood outside Mercer's general store, one boot propped against a post, arms crossed over a chest that looked like it had been carved out of something older than the town itself. His coat was worn leather, stained dark in places she didn't want to think about. His hat sat low, shadowing a face that hadn't seen a razor in weeks, maybe months. But it wasn't the beard or the coat or even the rifle slung across his back that made people stare. It was the way he stood, like he didn't owe the world a damn thing. Ruth's eyes caught his for half a second, just long enough to see they were pale, cold, the color of a sky before snow. And then she looked away fast, the way you'd look away from a wolf. "That's Voss," says someone whispered behind her. She didn't turn around, didn't need to. Everyone knew who Caleb Voss was. The mountain man. The ghost who came down 4 times a year for supplies and disappeared back into the high wilderness like smoke. The one women whispered about at quilting circles and men didn't joke about, not even when they were drunk. Ruth kept walking. She had 6 more blocks to go, and getting tangled up in whatever storm Caleb Voss carried with him wasn't on her list. Her shop sat at the end of a dirt lane that didn't have a name, just a number the postman had stopped remembering. It wasn't much. 1 room with a table, a chair, a sewing machine older than she was, and a narrow bed shoved into the corner behind a curtain that didn't quite close. The sign above the door said Calder Tailoring and Mending in letters she'd painted herself 3 years ago, back when she still thought hard work and skill would be enough. She'd been wrong. Ruth pushed the door open with her hip and dropped the bundle of shirts onto the table. Her fingers ached. Her back ached. Everything ached, the way it always did after a 12-hour day spent hunched over needle and thread, fixing hems for women who looked at her like she was part of the furniture. She lit the lamp, filled the kettle, and sat down to finish Mrs. Brennan's dress, the one that was already 2 days late because Mrs. Brennan had changed her mind about the neckline 3 times and acted like Ruth was the problem. The knock came just as the water started to boil. Ruth froze. Nobody knocked after dark. Not here. Not at her door. She stood slowly, wiping her palms on her apron. "Who is it?" "Delivery?" The voice was young, male, nervous. Ruth cracked the door open and found Tommy Blake standing on her step, holding a package wrapped in brown paper. He was 16, gap-toothed, the kind of kid who ran errands for a nickel and didn't ask questions. "What's this?" "Don't know, ma'am. Man paid me to bring it to you." "What man?" Tommy shrugged. "Big guy. Didn't say his name, just said to bring it to the seamstress at the end of the lane." Ruth's stomach tightened. She took the package, light and soft under her fingers, and pressed a coin into Tommy's hand. He tipped his hat and bolted before she could ask anything else. She closed the door, locked it. Then she stood there in the lamplight, staring at the package like it might bite. It took her 5 full minutes to unwrap it. Inside was fabric. Not the cheap cotton she bought in bulk from the mercantile. Not the scratchy wool she used for work shirts. This was silk, deep green, the color of pine needles after rain, soft as water, expensive as sin. There was no note, no name, nothing, just the silk and a feeling in her chest she didn't have a word for. But the second time Ruth saw Caleb Voss, he was watching her. It was 3 days later, early morning, and she was crossing the street toward the post office. The air was cold enough to sting, and she'd wrapped her shawl tight, head down against the wind. She felt his eyes before she saw him. It was a weight, a pressure, the kind of attention that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Ruth stopped, turned her head. He was leaning against the side of the saloon 20 feet away, coffee cup in one hand. He didn't look away when she met his gaze. Didn't smile, didn't nod. Just watched. Her pulse kicked. She didn't know why. She looked away first, again. By the end of the week, the whole town was talking. Did you see him looking at her? At Ruth Calder? You're joking. I'm not. I saw it myself, outside the post office, just staring. Why on earth would Caleb Voss look twice at her? Ruth heard it in pieces. At the mercantile. Outside the church. In the careful silence that fell when she walked into a room, she told herself it didn't matter. It always mattered. What? The third time he spoke. Ruth was leaving the bakery, a loaf of bread tucked under her arm, when he stepped into her path. She stopped so fast she nearly dropped the bread. Up close, he was bigger than she'd thought. Taller, broader. His face was all hard lines and sharp angles, weathered by wind and sun, and something else she couldn't name. His eyes were still pale, still cold, but there was something else in them now. Curiosity. You're Ruth Calder. It wasn't a question. She swallowed. I am. You do tailoring. Mending mostly. He nodded slowly, like he was filing that away. You get the fabric? Her breath caught. So it had been him. I did. You like it? Yes, it's beautiful, but I can't accept it. Why not? Because it's too much, because I don't know what you want, because people are already talking, and this will make it worse. She said none of those things. I don't take gifts from strangers. Something almost like a smile touched the corner of his mouth. It didn't make him look friendlier. If anything, it made him look more dangerous. Fair enough. He tipped his hat. Enjoy the bread, Miss Calder. And then he walked away, boots heavy on the dirt street, leaving Ruth standing there with her heart pounding and no idea what the hell had just happened. The town watched. They always watched. Ruth Calder wasn't the kind of woman men noticed. She wasn't ugly, not exactly, but she wasn't pretty either. She was plain, thin, quiet, the kind of woman who faded into the background, useful but forgettable, the way a chair was useful but forgettable. She wore drab colors, kept her hair pinned tight, spoke only when spoken to. She had no family, no dowry, no prospects. She was, by every measure that mattered in Red Hollow, nobody. So when Caleb Voss started showing up on her street, people noticed. When he started tipping his hat to her in public, they whispered. And when he walked into the diner one Sunday afternoon and sat down at the counter right next to her, ignoring 3 empty tables and the open stares of every person in the room, they stopped whispering and started scheming. Ruth didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on her plate, on the chicken and potatoes she'd been eating in silence, the way she always did, alone, unnoticed, until now. Afternoon, Miss Calder. His voice was low, rough, like gravel under boots. Mr. Voss? You mind if I sit here? You already are. That almost smile again. Fair point. The diner had gone so quiet Ruth could hear the clock ticking on the wall. She could feel every pair of eyes locked on them, could practically hear the gossip writing itself in real time. Why her? What does he see in her? She must have done something. Ruth's hands tightened around her fork. Caleb signaled the waitress, Betty Marks, who looked like she'd been slapped, and ordered coffee. Black. Then he sat there, silent, drinking his coffee while Ruth tried to disappear into her seat. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. Why are you doing this? He glanced at her. Doing what? This. Sitting here, talking to me. People are staring. Let them. It's not that simple. Why not? Because you don't live here. Because you don't know what it's like to be me. Because the second you leave, I'm the one who has to stay and deal with the fallout. She didn't say any of that either. You don't know this town. I know enough. He set his cup down, turned slightly in his seat so he was facing her. His knee brushed hers under the counter. She went still. I know they treat you like you're invisible, he said quietly. I know they take your work and pay you half what it's worth. I know they talk about you like you're not standing right there. Ruth's throat tightened. I also know, he continued, that you're the only person in this whole damn town who doesn't look at me like I'm either a prize or a monster. She blinked. What do I look at you like? He smiled then. A real one. Small, crooked, but real. Like I'm just a man. He walked her home that day, not because she asked, not because she needed it, but because he wanted to. They didn't talk much. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just there. heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. When they reached her door, he stopped. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said. "Back to the mountains." "I know. I'll be gone 3 months." "I know." He looked at her for a long moment, and Ruth had the strangest feeling he was memorizing her face. "When I come back," he said slowly, "I'd like to take you to dinner. A real one. At the hotel." Ruth's heart stopped. Dinner at the hotel wasn't just dinner. It was a statement. It was public. Intentional. It meant something. It meant everything. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I want to. People will talk." "They already are." "They'll make my life hell." "They already do." She didn't have an answer for that. Caleb stepped closer. Not touching, not crowding, just close. "I'm not asking you to marry me, Ruth. I'm asking you to have dinner with me. One meal. That's all. And if I say no, then I'll leave you alone." She believed him. That was the worst part. She believed him completely. "Okay," she heard herself say. "When you come back, I'll have dinner with you." He smiled again, that crooked, dangerous smile that made her chest ache. "Good." He tipped his hat, turned, and walked away. Ruth stood on her doorstep, watching him go, and wondered if she'd just made the best decision of her life. Or the worst. The next morning, Caleb Voss rode out of Red Hollow at dawn. He didn't look back, but Ruth stood at her window and watched until he disappeared into the trees, into the mountains, into the wild place he came from. And for the first time in her life, she felt like someone had actually seen her. Not her work. Not her usefulness. Her. It was terrifying. It was intoxicating. And it was only the beginning. The weeks after Caleb left were the longest of Ruth's life. Not because she missed him, she barely knew him, but because the town didn't let her forget. The whispers started immediately. "Did you see them at the diner? Practically sitting in each other's laps. What does he want with her? Maybe she's, easy." Ruth heard it all. She always heard it all. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't just dismissal. It was anger. Because Caleb Voss wasn't just any man. He was the man. The one every eligible woman in Red Hollow had been chasing for years. The one who ignored them all. And he'd chosen Ruth. Plain, poor, nobody Ruth. It was an insult. A slap in the face to every woman who'd tried and failed. And they weren't going to let it stand. It started small. Mrs. Brennan came by to pick up her dress and claimed the stitching was sloppy, even though Ruth had spent 2 nights getting it perfect. She refused to pay full price. Mrs. Garrett canceled her order for 3 shirts and didn't explain why. At the mercantile, the clerk who usually gave Ruth scraps of fabric for free suddenly couldn't find any. Ruth told herself it would pass. It didn't. By the end of the first month, half her clients had found other seamstresses. The ones who stayed paid late or not at all. By the end of the second month, she'd burned through her savings and started skipping meals. And still, she didn't break. She worked harder, stayed up later, took jobs no one else wanted, mending old sacks, patching work pants, hemming curtains. She survived, because that's what she did. She survived. 3 months to the day after Caleb left, he came back. Ruth was at her table, bent over a torn coat by candlelight, when she heard the knock. Her heart stopped. She knew somehow before she even opened the door. He stood on her step, hat in hand, looking exactly the same except for the fresh scar along his jaw. "Evening, Miss Calder? Mr. Voss? You still willing to have dinner with me?" Ruth should have said no, should have told him what the town had done, how much worse it would get, how she couldn't afford to be seen with him. Instead, she said, "When?" "Saturday, 6 o'clock. I'll pick you up. People will talk." "I'm counting on it." He smiled, that crooked, dangerous smile. And Ruth, against every instinct screaming at her to run, smiled back. Saturday came too fast and not fast enough. Ruth spent the afternoon in a panic. She had nothing to wear, nothing even close to appropriate for the hotel dining room. Everything she owned was plain, worn, serviceable, except the green silk. She'd kept it hidden, wrapped in paper, tucked under her bed. She told herself she'd return it, sell it, do something with it. But she hadn't. Now, staring at it in the fading light, she made a decision. She spent 4 hours cutting and stitching, her fingers flying, her mind blank except for the work. She didn't let herself think about what she was doing, what it meant, what would happen. She just sewed. By 5:30, the dress was finished. It was simple, high-necked, long-sleeved, nothing scandalous. But the silk moved like water, caught the light, made her skin look warm instead of pale, made her look like someone worth noticing. Ruth stared at herself in the cracked mirror above her washstand and barely recognized the woman staring back. The knock came at 6 exactly. She opened the door. Caleb stood there in a clean shirt, shaved jaw, hair combed back. He looked almost civilized. Almost. His eyes went wide when he saw her. Ruth. It was the first time he'd said her name without the miss. It sounded different in his mouth. Rough. Real. You ready? No. Yes. He offered his arm. She took it. And together, they walked down the lane, onto Main Street, toward the hotel, toward the storm. Hot. The dining room went silent when they walked in. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. Ruth felt the weight of 100 eyes, 100 judgments, 100 unspoken accusations. Caleb didn't seem to notice. He led her to a table by the window, the best table in the house, and pulled out her chair like she was somebody, like she mattered. Ruth sat. Her hands were shaking. You okay? Caleb asked quietly. Everyone's staring. Let them. Easy for you to say. You'll be gone in a week. I have to live here. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on hers. Then don't. Ruth blinked. Don't what? Live here. Her breath caught. I'm not saying tonight, he continued. I'm not saying tomorrow. But Ruth, look around. Look at how they treat you. You think it's going to get better? You think they're suddenly going to respect you? I don't have anywhere else to go. Yeah, you do. Where? He didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. The answer was written all over his face. With me. Ruth's chest tightened. Before she could respond, the waitress appeared. Susan Hall, whose mother Ruth had made 3 dresses for last year. Susan looked at Ruth like she was something stuck to her shoe. What can I get you? Caleb ordered for both of them without looking at the menu. Steak, potatoes, wine. Susan wrote it down and left without another word. That was her being polite, Ruth said quietly. I noticed. It's going to get worse. I know. Then why are we doing this? Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her. His palm was rough, scarred, warm. Because I don't give a damn what they think, he said. And I don't think you do either. Not really. Ruth wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because he was right. She didn't care what they thought. She just cared about surviving. And maybe, just maybe, survival wasn't enough anymore. They talked through dinner, really talked. Caleb told her about the mountains, about the cabin he'd built with his own hands, about the winters that could kill you if you weren't careful, about the silence that stretched for miles. You ever get lonely? Ruth asked. Sometimes. Then why stay? Because the mountains don't lie. They don't pretend. You're either strong enough to survive them or you're not. There's no middle ground. That sounds terrible, he smiled. It sounds honest. Ruth thought about that. About honesty. About a life where your worth wasn't measured by what other people thought of you, but by what you could do with your own 2 hands. It sounded impossible. It sounded perfect. What about you? Caleb asked. Why stay here? I don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Not everyone has options. You do now. Ruth looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected. Not pity, not lust, not even kindness exactly. Just clarity. He saw her the way she was, not the way the town wanted her to be, and he wanted her anyway. I don't even know you, she whispered. Then get to know me. How? Come with me. When I leave next week. Come see the mountains. See the cabin. See if you can stand it. And if I can't, then I'll bring you back. You'd do that? Ruth. He squeezed her hand. I'd do a lot of things for you. Her throat went tight. Before she could answer, the door to the dining room slammed open, and everything went to hell. Caroline Pritchard stood in the doorway like an avenging angel. Blonde, beautiful, daughter of the town's richest family, the woman everyone assumed Caleb would eventually marry. She looked at Ruth like Ruth was dirt. "Well," Caroline said loudly, "isn't this cozy?" The room, already silent, somehow got quieter. Caleb didn't let go of Ruth's hand. "Caroline." "Caleb." She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "I heard you were back. I was hoping you'd stop by." "Been busy." "I can see that." Her gaze flicked to Ruth, dismissive, cruel. "I didn't realize you were so charitable." Ruth's stomach turned. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Careful," he said quietly. "Or what?" Caroline laughed. "You'll defend her honor? She doesn't have any honor to defend." Ruth pulled her hand back, stood. "Excuse me," she said, voice shaking. "I need to—" "Sit down," Caleb said. It wasn't loud, wasn't harsh, but it stopped Ruth cold. She sat. Caleb stood instead. He crossed the room in 4 long strides and stopped inches from Caroline. "You're done," he said. Caroline's smile faltered. "I'm what?" "You heard me? You're done. You don't talk to her. You don't look at her. You don't so much as think about her. Understood? You can't tell me—" "I just did." Caroline's face went red, then white. "She's nothing," she hissed. "A nobody. She's more than you'll ever be." The words hung in the air like a slap. Caroline's mouth opened, closed. Then she turned and walked out, heels clicking, back straight, dignity shredded. The door slammed behind her. Caleb walked back to the table, sat down, and picked up his fork like nothing had happened. "You didn't have to do that," Ruth whispered. "Yeah, I did. She'll make me pay for this." "She'll try." Ruth's hands were shaking again. Caleb reached across the table and covered them with his own. "Listen to me," he said. "You've spent your whole life making yourself small so people like her could feel big. That ends now. You don't understand. I understand plenty. I understand that you're scared. I understand that this town has beaten you down for so long you've forgotten what it feels like to stand up. But Ruth," his grip tightened, "you're stronger than they are, stronger than all of them. How do you know? Because you're still here." Ruth's eyes burned. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. But something in her chest cracked open, something that had been locked tight for so long, she'd forgotten it was there. Hope. Dangerous, reckless, terrifying hope. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, what?" "I'll come with you, to the mountains. I'll come." Caleb's face split into a grin, the first real, unguarded smile she'd seen. "Good," he said, "because I wasn't planning on taking no for an answer." They finished dinner in silence, not the awkward kind, the easy kind. When they walked out of the hotel, the street was lined with people, watching, waiting. Ruth didn't look at them. She kept her eyes forward, her hand on Caleb's arm, her chin up. For the first time in her life, she didn't care what they thought. She'd made her choice, and there was no going back. The walk back to Ruth's shop should have felt triumphant. It didn't. It felt like walking through a minefield with everyone watching, waiting for her to step wrong. Caleb didn't seem bothered. He walked with his usual easy stride, hand resting light on the small of her back, nodding to people who refused to nod back. Ruth kept her eyes forward, but she could feel the weight of their stares like stones against her skin. When they reached her door, he stopped. "You want me to stay?" "No." The answer came too fast. She softened it. "I'll be fine." "You sure?" Ruth looked up at him. In the lamplight from her window, his face was all shadows and sharp edges. He looked like he could tear the world apart if he wanted to. Maybe he could. "They're just words," she said. "I've survived worse." "Words turn into actions real quick in places like this." "I know." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone." "Caleb, I mean it, Ruth. Not for anyone but me." There was something in his voice that made her chest tight. Not fear. Something else. Something that felt like being seen and protected and terrifying all at once. Okay. He touched her cheek. Just once. Just his fingers against her jaw, rough and warm. I'll be back in the morning. We'll talk about leaving. Then he was gone, boots heavy on the dirt, disappearing into the dark. Ruth went inside and locked the door. She stood there with her back against it, heart pounding, and wondered what the hell she'd just agreed to. The mountains. Leaving Red Hollow, leaving everything she knew, as miserable as it was, for a life she couldn't even imagine, with a man she barely knew. It was insane. It was the sanest thing she'd ever considered. Ruth changed out of the green silk dress, folded it carefully, and put it back under the bed. Then she sat at her table and tried to work, tried to finish the coat she'd started days ago. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She gave up after half an hour and went to bed. Sleep didn't come. She lay there in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the windows, and thought about all the ways this could go wrong. The knock came at midnight. Ruth jerked upright, heart in her throat. Who is it? Silence. Then another knock. Harder. I said, who is it? Open the door, Ruth. A woman's voice. Familiar. Cold. Caroline Pritchard. Ruth stayed in bed. Go away. I just want to talk. We have nothing to talk about. Please. The words sounded wrong in Caroline's mouth. Too soft. Too careful. Just for a minute. Every instinct Ruth had screamed at her to stay where she was, to ignore it, to let Caroline freeze on her doorstep until she got bored and left. But there was something in that voice, something that made Ruth hesitate. She got up, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, crossed to the door, but didn't unlock it. What do you want? I want to apologize. Ruth almost laughed. You want to what? I was cruel tonight at the hotel. You didn't deserve that. No, I didn't. A pause, then quieter. Can I come in? No. Ruth, please, I'm trying to… I don't care what you're trying to do. I want you to leave. Another pause, longer this time. When Caroline spoke again, the softness was gone. You think he cares about you? You think this is real? Ruth closed her eyes. Go home, Caroline. He does this every time he comes down. Picks some girl, makes her feel special, then disappears for months. You're not the first. You won't be the last. I'm not listening to this. He's playing with you, Ruth. And when he's done, you'll be left here with nothing. No work, no friends, nothing. Is that really worth it? Ruth's hands curled into fists. You want to know what's worth it? She said quietly. Having one person look at me like I'm not invisible. Having one person treat me like I matter, even if it only lasts a week, even if it all falls apart. That's worth more than anything this town has ever given me. Silence. Then footsteps. Walking away. Ruth stood at the door until she couldn't hear them anymore, then went back to bed and didn't sleep at all. Morning came cold and gray. Ruth washed her face, pinned up her hair, and tried to look like someone who hadn't spent the night fighting ghosts. Caleb showed up at dawn with coffee and bread from the bakery. You look tired, he said. Couldn't sleep. Caroline come by? Ruth's head snapped up. How did you know? I was watching. You were what? Watching. From across the street, all night. Ruth stared at him. You stood outside all night? Sat, mostly. Found a decent spot behind the feed store. Caleb, I told you I'd keep you safe. I meant it. Ruth didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know what to do with the feeling spreading through her chest, warm and tight and unfamiliar. What did she say? Caleb asked. Nothing that matters. Ruth, she sighed, set down her coffee. She said you do this every time you come down. Pick a girl, make her feel special, then leave. Caleb's jaw tightened. And you believed her? No. Ruth met his eyes. But I need you to tell me the truth. Have you done this before? He was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. I've never asked a woman to come with me. Never wanted to. Not until you. Why me? I don't know. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I've been asking myself the same thing for 3 months. What is it about you? You're not the prettiest woman I've ever seen. Not the friendliest. Not the easiest to talk to. Ruth flinched. But you're real, Caleb continued. You don't perform. You don't pretend. You just are. And when you look at me, I don't feel like a prize or a project. I just feel like a man." Ruth's throat went tight. "I can't promise you it'll be easy," he said. "The cabin's small. The winters are brutal. You'll work harder than you've ever worked in your life. And if you hate it, if you can't stand it, I'll bring you back. But Ruth," he stepped closer, "I think you could be happy there. I think you could be free. What if I'm not strong enough?" "You are." "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do." Ruth looked at him. At this man who'd walked into her life like a storm and turned everything upside down. This man who saw something in her that no one else did. Maybe not even herself. "When do we leave?" she asked. Caleb smiled. "Tomorrow." Tomorrow. One word, one day, one chance to walk away from everything she'd ever known. Ruth took a breath, let it out slow. "Okay." They spent the rest of the day getting ready. Caleb went to the mercantile for supplies. Ruth packed what little she owned: clothes, sewing supplies, the green silk dress she couldn't bring herself to leave behind. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. What would be the point? By nightfall, everything was ready. Caleb would pick her up at first light. They'd ride out before the town woke up, before anyone could stop them or question them or turn this into something uglier than it already was. Ruth sat at her table one last time, looking around the little room that had been her whole world for 3 years. The narrow bed, the sewing machine, the lamp that flickered when the wind blew. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and she was about to walk away from it, for a man she barely knew, for a life she couldn't imagine, for a chance at something better. Or something worse. She didn't know which. The knock came just after dark. Ruth opened the door, expecting Caleb. It was Tommy Blake. The kid looked scared. His face was pale, his hand shaking. "Tommy, what's wrong?" "You gotta leave, Miss Calder. Now, tonight." Ruth's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "I heard my pa talking, him and some other men. They're planning something bad." Planning what?" Tommy glanced over his shoulder, then leaned in close. "They're gonna burn your shop. Tomorrow night after you leave with Voss. They want to make sure you got nothing to come back to." The words hit Ruth like a fist. "Who?" "I don't know all of them, but Miss Pritchard's pa is one. And Mr. Garrett, and some others." Ruth's hands went cold. "Did you tell anyone?" "Who would I tell? The sheriff's in on it." Of course he was. Ruth looked past Tommy into the dark street and felt something shift inside her, something cold and hard and furious. They were going to take the last thing she had, not because she'd done anything wrong, because she'd dared to want something better. "Thank you, Tommy." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but you need to go. If they find out you told me, I'll be fine. Just be careful, Miss Calder." He bolted before she could say anything else. Ruth closed the door, locked it, then stood there in the lamplight, breathing hard, mind racing. She could leave tonight, pack what she could carry, and meet Caleb early. Let them burn the shop. It wasn't worth much anyway, but something in her chest wouldn't let her. This was her shop, her work, her life. And she was done letting them take things from her. Ruth grabbed her coat and walked out into the night. Caleb's room was at the boarding house on 3rd Street. Ruth had never been inside, but she knew which window was his. 2nd floor, corner room, facing the street. She knocked on the front door. Mrs. Brennan answered, took one look at Ruth, and scowled. "He's not here." "Where is he?" "How should I know? I'm not his keeper." "Mrs. Brennan, please, it's important." "I'm sure it is." The woman started to close the door. Ruth stuck her foot in the gap. "Tell me where he is, or I'll stand on your porch and scream until everyone on this street knows you rent rooms to unmarried men and women on the same floor." Mrs. Brennan's face went purple. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." A long, tense moment passed. Then Mrs. Brennan sighed. "The saloon. He's at the saloon." Ruth pulled her foot back and turned before the woman could slam the door. The saloon was loud and bright and full of smoke. Ruth had never been inside. Women didn't go into saloons, not unless they worked there, and even then people talked. She didn't care. She pushed through the doors and every conversation stopped. Caleb was at the bar, whiskey in hand, talking to a man Ruth didn't recognize. He looked up when the room went quiet, saw her, and was on his feet in half a second. "Ruth, What's wrong? We need to talk. Now. He didn't argue, just followed her outside onto the porch where the air was cold and clean. What happened? Ruth told him. About Tommy, about the men, about the plan to burn her shop. Caleb's face went hard. Who? Does it matter? Yeah, it matters. Pritchard, Garrett, the sheriff, maybe others. Caleb swore, low and vicious. We leave tonight, he said. Right now. Get your things and… No. He stopped, stared at her. What? I'm not running. Ruth, they're going to burn your shop. Then I'll stop them. How? I don't know yet, but I'm not leaving like this. I'm not giving them the satisfaction. Caleb grabbed her shoulders. Not rough, just firm. Listen to me. These men are dangerous. They're not going to stop because you ask nicely. They want you gone, and they'll do whatever it takes to make that happen. So let them. What? Ruth looked up at him. Let them burn it. But not tomorrow. Tonight. Right now, while I'm still here. Caleb's eyes widened. You want to burn your own shop? I want to take away their power. They think they can scare me. They think they can break me. But if I do it first on my terms, they get nothing. That's insane. Maybe, but it's mine. Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, short and sharp and disbelieving. You're serious? Completely. You know what? Fine. Let's do it. They went back to the shop together. Ruth packed the last of her things, the sewing machine, the good scissors, the fabric she'd been saving, everything that mattered, everything she could carry. Caleb loaded it onto his horse while Ruth stood in the middle of the empty room and said goodbye to the only home she'd had. It didn't take long, then Caleb handed her the lantern. You sure about this? Ruth looked at the flame, at the walls, at the table where she'd spent countless nights bent over needle and thread, trying to make something out of nothing. I'm sure. She set the lantern down on the table, stepped back, watched as the flame caught the curtain, spread to the bed, climbed the walls like something alive. Smoke filled the room fast. Ruth backed toward the door, eyes stinging, chest tight. Caleb grabbed her hand and pulled her outside. They stood in the street and watched it burn. People started coming out of their houses, shouting, running for buckets. But the fire was already too big, too hot, too hungry. The whole building went up like kindling. Ruth watched and felt nothing, no grief, no regret, just a strange, weightless kind of freedom. Someone grabbed her arm, spun her around. Caroline Pritchard, face twisted with rage. What did you do? Ruth pulled her arm free. What does it look like? You burned it. You actually burned it. That's right. You're insane. Maybe. Caroline looked at Caleb, then back at Ruth, and something ugly crossed her face. You think this changes anything? You think running off with him makes you special? You're still nothing, Ruth. You'll always be nothing. Ruth smiled. She didn't mean to. It just happened. You're probably right, she said, but at least I'll be nothing somewhere else. Caroline's mouth opened, closed. Then she turned and walked away, shoulders shaking with something that might have been rage or tears or both. Ruth didn't watch her go. She was done watching. The fire burned through the night. By morning, there was nothing left but ash and blackened wood and the smell of smoke that would linger for days. The town stood in clusters, whispering, pointing, trying to piece together what had happened. Ruth didn't explain. She and Caleb packed the horses in silence, loaded the last of her things, and stood together at the edge of town as the sun came up. You ready? Caleb asked. Ruth looked back one last time, at the ruins of her shop, at the people who'd never seen her as anything but invisible, at the life she was leaving behind. Yeah, she said, I'm ready. They rode out as the town woke up, heading north into the mountains, into the unknown, into a future Ruth couldn't see but wasn't afraid of anymore, because she'd already survived the worst they could do. And she was still standing. The first 3 days on the trail were harder than Ruth expected. Not the riding. She'd ridden before, though never for hours at a stretch. Not the cold, though the nights were brutal and the wind cut through her coat like knives. It was the silence. Caleb didn't talk much. He rode ahead, checking the trail, scanning the horizon, always watching. Ruth followed, alone with her thoughts and the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her. She'd expected to feel something, relief, maybe, or fear. Instead, she felt hollow. Like she'd burned more than just the shop. Like she'd burned some part of herself and didn't know yet what would grow back in its place. On the fourth day, they stopped early. Caleb built a fire while Ruth unpacked the bedrolls. They ate in silence, dried meat, hard bread, coffee that tasted like dirt. "You okay?" Caleb asked finally. Ruth looked up. "I don't know." "That's fair. Is it always this quiet? In the mountains?" "Yeah." "How do you stand it?" Caleb poked at the fire. "I like the quiet. Means nothing's trying to kill me." Ruth almost smiled. "That's a low bar." "I've got low standards." This time she did smile, just a little. They sat in silence for a while longer. Then Ruth asked the question that had been eating at her since they left. "Do you regret it? Asking me to come?" Caleb looked at her. "Do you regret saying yes?" "I don't know yet." "Then I don't regret asking." "What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough? You burned down your own shop and walked away from the only life you've ever known. I think you're plenty strong." "That was anger. Anger's easy." "So what comes after anger?" Ruth stared into the fire. "I don't know." "Then I guess we'll find out." They reached the cabin on the 7th day. Ruth saw it from a distance first, a dark shape against the trees, small and solid and somehow lonely. As they got closer, she could make out details. Log walls, a stone chimney, a porch that sagged slightly on one side. Windows too small to let in much light. It looked like exactly what it was. A place built for survival, not comfort. Caleb dismounted and helped Ruth down. Her legs were shaking. She'd been on the horse so long she'd forgotten what standing felt like. "This is it," he said. Ruth looked at the cabin, at the trees pressing in on all sides, at the mountains rising in the distance, white-capped and endless. "It's quiet," she said. "Told you. I mean really quiet. I can't hear anything." "You'll get used to it." Ruth wasn't sure she believed him. Caleb unlocked the door and gestured for her to go in first. The inside was smaller than her shop had been. One room, a bed in the corner, a table and 2 chairs, a fireplace, shelves lined with cans and jars and things Ruth couldn't identify. It smelled like wood smoke and leather and something sharp she couldn't name. "It's not much," Caleb said behind her. "No," Ruth agreed. "It's not." "You want to leave?" She turned to look at him. He was watching her carefully, like he was trying to read her face, trying to figure out if he'd made a mistake. "Ask me again in a week," Ruth said. Something in his shoulders relaxed. "Fair enough." They spent the rest of the day unloading the horses, unpacking supplies, settling in. Caleb showed Ruth where everything was: the well, the woodpile, the shed where he kept tools and traps and things she didn't ask about. By nightfall, Ruth was exhausted. She sat at the table while Caleb made dinner, stew from dried venison and vegetables he'd canned last fall. It tasted better than she expected. "You can cook," she said. "I can survive. There's a difference. I can teach you. To actually cook, I mean." "You know how?" "Some. Enough." Caleb smiled. "I'd like that." They ate in silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Ruth pulled her shawl tighter. "It gets colder," Caleb said. "How much colder?" "A lot." Ruth didn't ask for details. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. After dinner, Caleb banked the fire and pulled out the bedrolls. "You take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep on the floor." "That's not—" "Ruth, take the bed." She was too tired to argue. She lay down on the narrow mattress, still fully clothed, and pulled the blanket up to her chin. The bed smelled like Caleb, wood smoke and pine and something else, something clean and wild. It should have felt strange. It didn't. Caleb settled onto the floor near the fireplace, close enough that Ruth could hear him breathing. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For not asking if I'm okay, for not trying to fix it." A pause, then, "You're welcome." Ruth closed her eyes and let the exhaustion pull her under. She dreamed of fire. Ruth woke to the sound of an axe hitting wood. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The room was too dark, too quiet, too cold. Then she remembered. The cabin, the mountains, Caleb. She sat up, every muscle in her body screaming. The bed was empty beside her, the blanket Caleb had used folded neatly on the floor. Gray light seeped through the windows. Dawn, maybe. Or close to it. Ruth stood, legs shaking, and wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. The fire had burned down to embers. She fed it carefully, the way her mother had taught her years ago, back when she still had a mother. The door opened and Caleb came in, arms full of wood. He stopped when he saw her. "You're up. Hard to sleep through all that noise." "Sorry. Needed to get the woodpile restocked before the snow comes." "Snow? It's barely October." "Up here, October is winter." Ruth looked out the window at the trees, still green, still full. "When?" "Could be tomorrow, could be next week. But it's coming." He stacked the wood by the fireplace, then crossed to the stove and started making coffee. Ruth watched him move through the small space with an ease that came from years of practice. Every motion efficient, nothing wasted. "You always wake up this early?" she asked. "Earlier, usually. Let you sleep in." "That was sleeping in?" Caleb almost smiled. "Welcome to the mountains." They drank coffee in silence. Ruth's hands wrapped around the tin cup, pulling in the warmth. Outside, birds were starting to sing. Different birds than the ones in Red Hollow. Sharper calls. Wilder. "What do you do all day?" Ruth asked. "Up here, I mean." "Depends on the season. Right now, chop wood, hunt, get ready for winter. Come spring, I trap, check the lines, sell the pelts when I go down to town." "That's it? That's your whole life?" Caleb looked at her. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant." He refilled his coffee. "It's simple. I like simple." Ruth thought about her life in Red Hollow. The endless sewing, the customers who never seemed satisfied, the nights spent hunched over a table, fingers bleeding, eyes burning, trying to make enough to survive another week. "Simple sounds good," she said quietly. "It's also hard. Harder than anything you've done before." "You keep saying that." "Because I need you to understand. Winter up here isn't like winter down there. You can't just wait it out. You have to fight for every day. And if you're not ready, if you're not strong enough, it'll kill you." But Ruth met his eyes. "Then teach me." "Teach you what?" "How to survive." Caleb set down his cup. "You sure?" "I didn't come all this way to sit inside and be useless." Something shifted in his face. Respect, maybe, or relief. "All right," he said. "Get dressed. We start now." The first lesson was water. Caleb led her to the well, showed her how to work the crank, how to pull up the bucket without spilling half of it. "You'll do this twice a day," he said. "Morning and night. More if we're cooking or washing." Ruth's arms were shaking by the time she got the bucket to the top. Caleb didn't help, just watched. "Again," he said when she set it down. "I just did it. And you'll do it 20 more times before winter. Your arms need to remember." Ruth wanted to argue, wanted to say she was tired, she was sore. She'd just ridden 7 days on horseback, and her whole body felt like it had been beaten with a stick. She didn't. She grabbed the crank and pulled. The second lesson was fire. "You can't let it die," Caleb said. "Not in winter. If the fire goes out, we freeze. Simple as that." He showed her how to bank it at night, how to feed it in the morning, how to read the coals to know when it needed more wood. "What if it goes out anyway?" Ruth asked. "Then we start over. But starting over takes time. And time is something you don't have when it's 20 below and the wind's coming through the walls." 20 below. Ruth tried to imagine it and couldn't. "How do you stand it?" she asked. "You get used to it." "That's not an answer." Caleb looked at her. "You want the truth? You don't stand it. You survive it. And some years, that's all you can do." The third lesson was food. Caleb took her to the shed and showed her the shelves lined with jars. Vegetables he'd canned, meat he'd dried, beans and flour and things Ruth didn't recognize. "This has to last us until spring," he said. 5 months, maybe 6. We run out, we starve." "What if we hunt?" "We will, but you can't count on it. Weather turns bad, animals go to ground. You need a backup." Ruth looked at the jars, counted them, did the math in her head. "That's not enough," she said. "I know, I usually eat less in winter, but with 2 of us—" He shook his head. "We'll make it work." "How?" "We hunt more now. before the snow, and we ration careful." Ruth felt something twist in her stomach. Guilt, maybe. She was taking his food, his supplies, his carefully calculated survival plan, and throwing it off balance. "I can help," she said. "I can hunt." "You ever shot a rifle?" "No." "Then you can't help. Not yet." "So teach me." Caleb studied her face. Then he pulled a rifle off the wall. "All right, let's see what you've got." They spent the afternoon in the clearing behind the cabin. Caleb set up targets, old cans, pieces of wood, and showed Ruth how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe. "Don't pull the trigger," he said. "Squeeze it, slow and steady." Ruth tried. The recoil nearly knocked her on her ass. The bullet went wide, disappearing into the trees. "Again," Caleb said. She tried again, and again, and again. By the time the sun started to set, Ruth's shoulder was bruised, her ears were ringing, and she still hadn't hit a single target. Caleb took the rifle back. "You'll get there." "When?" "When you stop trying so hard." "That doesn't make sense." "It will." They walked back to the cabin in silence. Ruth's legs felt like water. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Inside, Caleb made dinner. More stew, this time with potatoes and something that might have been rabbit. Ruth sat at the table and tried not to fall asleep in her chair. "You did good today," Caleb said. Ruth laughed. It came out bitter. "I didn't hit anything." "You didn't give up. That's what matters." "Is it? Up here?" "Yeah." Ruth looked at him. At this man who'd pulled her out of one life and dropped her into another, harder, stranger, lonelier than anything she'd imagined. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Living like this?" Caleb was quiet for a long time. "Sometimes," he said finally. "Winter gets long, real long. And there are nights when the wind's howling and the cabin's shaking, and I think about what it would be like to be somewhere warm, somewhere easy. Why don't you leave?" "Because easy doesn't mean better." Ruth didn't have an answer for that. They ate in silence. Outside, the wind picked up again, colder this time, carrying something that felt like snow. That night, Ruth lay in bed and listened to Caleb breathe on the floor beside her. She thought about Red Hollow, about the shop, about the people who had hated her for wanting something different. She didn't miss it, not the town, not the people, but she missed knowing what came next, missed the certainty of routine, even when that routine was miserable. Here, she didn't know anything, didn't know if she'd survive the winter, didn't know if Caleb would get tired of her, didn't know if she'd wake up one morning and realize she'd made a terrible mistake. All she knew was that she was here, and there was no going back. The days blurred together after that. Ruth woke at dawn, hauled water, fed the fire, learned to cook on the wood stove. She practiced with the rifle until her shoulder was one massive bruise. She helped Caleb chop wood, stack supplies, prepare the cabin for winter. Her hands blistered, her back ached. Every night she collapsed into bed so tired she could barely move. And every morning she got up and did it again. 2 weeks in, the first snow fell. Ruth woke to silence, a different kind of silence, heavier, muffled. She went to the window and her breath caught. Everything was white. The trees, the ground, the woodpile, everything buried under a blanket of snow so thick she couldn't see where the clearing ended and the forest began. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Caleb came to stand beside her. "It's deadly." "Can it be both?" He almost smiled. "Yeah, I guess it can." They spent the morning digging out. The door was blocked. The woodpile was buried. The path to the well had disappeared completely. Ruth's hands went numb within minutes. Her feet felt like blocks of ice. But she kept digging, kept moving, because stopping meant freezing, and freezing meant dying. By noon, they'd cleared enough to function, barely. Inside, Caleb built up the fire while Ruth made coffee with shaking hands. "How long will it last?" she asked. "The snow? All winter." "No, I mean this storm. Could be done already, could go for days, no way to know." Ruth looked out the window at the endless white and felt something close to panic. "Hey." Caleb's hand on her shoulder, warm and steady. "We're okay. We've got food, we've got wood, we'll be fine." "You sure?" "Yeah." Didn't sound sure. The storm lasted 3 days. By the end of it, Ruth thought she'd go insane from the confinement. The cabin was too small, too dark, too quiet except for the wind that never stopped howling. She and Caleb barely spoke. There was nothing to say. They ate, they fed the fire, they slept in shifts to make sure the cold didn't creep in. On the third night, Ruth broke. She was sitting at the table mending one of Caleb's shirts by lamplight when the tears started. She didn't mean to cry, didn't even realize she was crying until she tasted salt. "Ruth?" She shook her head, unable to speak. Caleb crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. "Talk to me." "I can't do this." The words came out broken. "I thought I could, but I can't. It's too hard, too cold, too—" She choked on a sob. "I don't belong here. You do. How do you know?" "Because you're still here." Ruth looked at him through blurred eyes. "That's not enough." "It is for now." He took the shirt from her hands, set it aside, and pulled her to her feet. Then he wrapped his arms around her and held on. Ruth buried her face in his chest and cried. She cried for the life she'd lost, for the one she'd chosen, for the fear and the exhaustion and the bone-deep loneliness that came with being so far from everything she'd ever known. Caleb didn't tell her it would be okay, didn't promise it would get easier. He just held her. When the tears finally stopped, Ruth pulled back, wiping her face with shaking hands. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm supposed to be strong." "You are strong. Strong enough to cry when you need to." Ruth laughed. It came out wet and shaky. "That doesn't make sense." "Welcome to the mountains." She smiled despite herself. That night, Caleb didn't sleep on the floor. Ruth didn't ask him to stay, didn't invite him into the bed. He just climbed in beside her, fully clothed, and wrapped an arm around her waist. "For warmth," he said quietly. "Right, for warmth." Ruth closed her eyes and let herself sink into the heat of him, into the solid weight of another human being in this vast, empty wilderness. She fell asleep faster than she had in weeks. When Ruth woke, the storm was over. She could tell before she even opened her eyes. The wind had stopped. The cabin felt lighter somehow, less like a cage. Caleb was already up, moving around the room with quiet efficiency. "Morning," he said when he saw her watching. "Morning. Storm's done. We need to check the traps." "Traps?" "Set them before the snow. Might have caught something." Ruth sat up, pushing hair out of her face. "Can I come?" Caleb hesitated. "It's a long walk, and cold." "I don't care." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Get dressed. Warm as you can." They set out an hour later, Ruth bundled in every piece of clothing she owned. The snow came up to her knees. Walking was brutal. Every step took effort. Every breath burned her lungs. But the air was clean, sharp, and the silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was just quiet. Caleb moved ahead of her, breaking trail, checking the traps he'd set along the tree line. Most were empty. 2 had rabbits. 1 had something bigger, a fox, red and limp and frozen. "Good," Caleb said, resetting the trap. "That'll help." Ruth looked at the dead animals and felt nothing. No pity, no disgust, just relief. They had food. On the way back, Caleb showed her how to read tracks in the snow. Deer, elk, something with paws too big to be a dog. "Wolf?" Ruth asked. "Maybe, or mountain lion." "That's comforting," Caleb smiled. "They won't bother us unless we bother them, mostly." "Mostly?" "Nothing's guaranteed up here, Ruth. That's the point." By the time they got back to the cabin, Ruth's legs were shaking and her feet were numb. But she'd made it. She'd walked miles through snow, helped check traps, carried a frozen rabbit on her back. She'd survived. That night, Caleb showed her how to skin the animals. It was messy, brutal work. Ruth's hands were slick with blood by the time they finished. "You did good," Caleb said, washing his hands in a bucket of snowmelt. "I thought I'd be sick." "But you weren't." "No, I wasn't." He looked at her, really looked at her. "You're tougher than you think." "I'm not tough. I'm just stubborn." "Same thing up here." Ruth laughed despite herself. That night, they ate rabbit stew, and Ruth felt something shift inside her, something small but important. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was learning to live. The weeks passed. The snow kept falling. The cold settled in like a living thing, relentless and hungry. But Ruth adapted. She learned to split wood without blistering her hands, learned to cook with limited supplies, learned to sleep through the wind and wake when the fire needed tending. She learned to shoot, not well, not yet, but better. One morning, she hit a can on the third try, and Caleb actually grinned. There you go. I got lucky. Luck counts. They checked the traps together now. Ruth could read tracks almost as well as Caleb, could reset a snare without help, could gut a rabbit without flinching. She was changing, not just learning, changing. Her hands grew calloused, her shoulders grew strong. She stopped flinching at every sound in the night, and slowly, carefully, something else changed too. The space between her and Caleb. It started small, his hand on her back when she was carrying water, her shoulder brushing his when they stood at the stove. The way they moved around each other in the tiny cabin, always aware, always careful. Then one night, a month into winter, Caleb kissed her. They were sitting by the fire, Ruth mending socks while Caleb sharpened his knife. The wind was howling outside. The cabin creaked and groaned. Ruth set down her mending, rubbing her tired eyes. You should sleep, Caleb said. So should you. I will. She looked at him. At the way the firelight caught in his hair, turned his eyes from pale to almost gold. Caleb? Yeah? I'm glad I came. He went still. Yeah? Yeah. He set down the knife, turned to face her fully. Ruth, she didn't let him finish. She leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't smooth, wasn't practiced. Their noses bumped. Ruth's hand landed awkwardly on his shoulder. But Caleb kissed her back, one hand coming up to cup her face, and suddenly nothing else mattered. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the diner, he said quietly. What took you so long? Didn't want to push, didn't want you to feel, I don't. Ruth pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. I don't feel pushed, I feel seen. Something in his expression cracked open. He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper. And when he pulled her into the bed, when they fumbled with buttons and laces and too many layers of wool, Ruth didn't think about Red Hollow or Caroline Pritchard or anything she'd left behind. She thought about this. Here. Now. This man who'd chosen her. This life she was building. This version of herself she was becoming. Afterward, they lay tangled together under every blanket they owned, the fire crackling, the wind howling, the world outside trying and failing to break in. You warm enough? Caleb asked. Ruth smiled against his chest. Getting there. His arm tightened around her. And for the first time since leaving Red Hollow, Ruth felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The next morning, they woke to silence. Real silence. No wind, no creaking, nothing. Caleb got up and looked out the window. Ruth watched him from the bed. What is it? Come see. She wrapped a blanket around herself and crossed to stand beside him. The world outside was perfectly still. The snow had stopped falling. The sky was clear and impossibly blue. And the mountains. The mountains stretched out forever, white and sharp and beautiful. It's stunning, Ruth whispered. It's a break in the weather, Caleb said. Won't last long. But while it does, he turned to her. You want to see something? See what? The valley, where the elk come in winter. How far? A few miles, but the walking's easier when the snow's settled. Ruth thought about it for half a second. Let's go. They packed light, water, dried meat, an extra blanket. Caleb brought his rifle. Ruth brought hers. The walk was hard but not impossible. The snow had crusted over, holding their weight most of the time. When it didn't, Caleb went first, breaking trail. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. After an hour, they crested a ridge and Ruth's breath caught. Below them, the valley opened up like a secret. Wide and white and empty except for a herd of elk grazing at the far end, dark shapes against the snow. There must be 50 of them, Ruth said. More. They come here every year, protected from the worst of the wind. They stood there in silence, watching the herd move slowly across the valley, watching the sun catch on their antlers. Ruth felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't even realized was tight. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For this, for showing me. Caleb took her hand, lacing their fingers together. You're part of this now, he said. The mountains, the valley, all of it. You earned it. Ruth looked at him, at this man who'd saved her without meaning to, who'd given her a chance when no one else would. I love you, she said. The words came out simple, easy, like they'd been waiting there all along. Caleb went still. Then he smiled, that crooked, dangerous smile she'd fallen for in Red Hollow. Good, he said, because I love you too. He kissed her there on the ridge, with the valley spread out below them and the mountains rising all around and the sky so blue it hurt to look at. And Ruth knew, with a certainty she'd never felt before, that she was home. Winter deepened and Ruth stopped counting days. Time moved differently in the mountains, not by clocks or calendars, but by the rhythm of survival. Wake, water, fire, food. Check traps, chop wood, mend clothes, sleep. Repeat until the sun came back, if it came back at all. Some days the cold was so brutal they stayed inside, huddled by the fire, speaking in whispers because even sound felt like it might freeze. Other days were clear and bright, and so beautiful it hurt to look at them. Ruth learned to tell the difference. Learned to read the sky the way Caleb did, watching for the gray haze that meant snow, the crystalline blue that meant dangerous cold, the thick clouds that meant a break in the weather. She learned other things, too, that Caleb snored when he slept on his back, that he liked his coffee bitter enough to strip paint, that he had a scar on his ribs from a hunting accident 3 years ago that had nearly killed him, that he was afraid of losing her. He didn't say it out loud, didn't have to. She could see it in the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, the way he checked on her in the night, making sure she was warm enough, breathing steady. I'm not going to die, Ruth told him one morning after catching him staring at her for the 5th time. I know. Then stop looking at me like I might disappear. Caleb's jaw tightened. Last woman who came up here with a man didn't make it through January. Ruth went still. What happened? Pneumonia. Her husband brought her down to town, but it was too late. She was gone before they reached the doctor. That won't happen to me. You don't know that. Neither do you. He didn't argue, just turned back to the fire and poked at it harder than necessary. Ruth crossed the room and put her hand on his shoulder. Hey, look at me. He did. I'm stronger than I was, she said. You made sure of that. And I'm not scared anymore. Not of the cold. Not of this. She gestured at the cabin, the mountains beyond. So stop waiting for me to break. Caleb's hand came up to cover hers. I'm not waiting for you to break. I'm terrified you already have, and you're just too stubborn to admit it. Ruth smiled. Maybe I am broken. Maybe we both are. But we're broken together, and that's better than being whole and alone. He pulled her into his arms and held on tight. They stood there for a long time, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside, 2 damaged people trying to keep each other warm. January turned into February. The cold didn't let up. If anything, it got worse. They ran low on firewood and had to dig through 4 feet of snow to get to the woodpile. Ruth's hands cracked and bled from the dry air and constant work. Caleb's cough came back, the one he'd had when they first met, deep and rattling. You need to rest, Ruth said. Can't. Too much to do. Caleb, I'm fine. He wasn't fine. She could hear it in every breath, see it in the way he moved slower, more carefully, like his ribs hurt. That night, she made him tea from the herbs he kept dried and hanging from the rafters. She didn't know what half of them were, but he told her which ones to use, and she trusted him. He drank it without complaint, then fell asleep sitting up at the table. Ruth guided him to bed, pulled off his boots, covered him with every blanket they had. Then she sat by the fire and kept watch. If he could protect her, she could protect him. The cough lasted a week. Ruth barely slept, keeping the fire hot, making tea, forcing him to eat even when he said he wasn't hungry. On the 8th day, he woke up clear-eyed and breathing easy. You're worse than a nursemaid, he grumbled. You're welcome. I didn't thank you. You should. He pulled her down onto the bed beside him. Thank you. That's better. He kissed her, soft and slow, and Ruth felt the fear she'd been carrying for days finally loosen its grip. They were going to be okay. They had to be. In late February, Caleb married her. There was no preacher, no witnesses, no ceremony beyond the two of them standing in front of the fire, hands clasped, speaking words they made up as they went. "I don't have a ring," Caleb said. "I don't need one. You deserve one. I deserve you. That's enough." He smiled at that. Then he kissed her, and Ruth felt something settle deep in her chest, a sense of permanence, of belonging. She was Ruth Voss now, not Calder, not the forgotten seamstress, not the woman no one saw. Voss. It felt right. That night they lay in bed and talked about the future. About spring, when the snow would melt and they could plant a garden. About summer, when Caleb would teach her to fish in the streams that ran through the high country. About next winter, when they'd be better prepared, stronger, more ready. "You think we'll make it?" Ruth asked. "Yeah, I do." "How do you know?" "Because we already have." Ruth thought about that, about everything they'd survived. The cold, the isolation, the fear. "What if I want more than this?" she asked quietly. Caleb went still. "More than what?" "More than just surviving. What if I want to build something, create something?" "Like what?" Ruth hesitated. The idea had been forming in her mind for weeks now, shapeless and uncertain, but growing stronger every day. "I want to sew again," she said. "Really sew, not just mending clothes. I want to make things. Beautiful things." "For who?" "For me. For you. Maybe for other people, if we ever see other people again." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "There's a trading post," he said finally, "about 40 miles north, run by a man named Garrett. No relation to the one in Red Hollow," he added quickly. "He sells supplies to trappers and miners. Sometimes buys goods too, if they're quality." Ruth's heart kicked. "You think he'd buy from me? If your work's as good as you say it is?" "Yeah, I think he would. It is that good." "Then we'll go, soon as the snow melts enough to travel." Ruth rolled over to face him. "You mean it?" "I don't say things I don't mean." She kissed him then, hard and grateful and full of hope. For the first time since leaving Red Hollow, she had a purpose beyond survival. She had a future. March came slow and brutal. The snow started to melt, then froze again. The trails turned to ice. The cabin leaked in 3 new places, and they spent 2 days patching the roof. But the days were getting longer. The sun was getting stronger. Spring was coming. Ruth spent her evenings sewing by lamplight. She'd been hoarding scraps of fabric, pieces of leather, anything she could use. Now she pulled them out and started creating. She made Caleb a new shirt first, simple but well-fitted, reinforced at the shoulders and elbows where his old ones always wore through. He put it on and looked at himself in the small mirror hanging by the door. "It fits perfect," he said, surprised. "I measured you while you were sleeping." "That's unsettling," Ruth laughed. "You want me to make you things or not?" "I want you to make things. Just maybe warn me next time you're measuring me in my sleep." She made gloves next, then a vest, then a coat lined with rabbit fur that took her 3 weeks and left her fingers raw. Every piece was better than the last. She was remembering skills she'd let rust in Red Hollow, rediscovering the pleasure of creating something that wasn't just functional, but beautiful. Caleb watched her work with something like awe. "You're really good at this," he said one night. "I know." "That's not arrogance, that's just fact." Ruth smiled. "It is fact. I'm the best seamstress you've ever met. You're the only seamstress I've ever met. Still counts." In early April, the snow finally started to melt in earnest. The trails opened up. The streams ran high and fast with runoff, and Caleb kept his promise. They packed light and set out for the trading post on a clear morning, the sun warm on their faces for the first time in months. Ruth had bundled her best pieces, the coat, 2 shirts, a pair of gloves, and wrapped them carefully in oilcloth. Her stomach was tight with nerves. "What if he doesn't want them?" she asked. "Then we bring them home and you make more." "What if he laughs at me?" "He won't. But what if—" Caleb stopped walking and turned to face her. "Ruth, you're good enough, better than good. And if Garrett can't see that, he's an idiot." She took a breath, let it out slow. "Okay. Okay." They walked on. The trading post was bigger than Ruth expected. Not just 1 building, but 3. clustered around a clearing that must have been a small town once. Now it was just Garrett and his wife and whoever passed through looking to trade. Garrett himself was a bear of a man, gray-bearded and sharp-eyed, with hands like slabs of meat and a voice that carried across the clearing. "Voss, didn't expect to see you till summer." "Got something to show you," Caleb said. "Yeah, let's see it." Ruth stepped forward, hands shaking, and unwrapped the oilcloth. Garrett took the coat first, held it up, examined the stitching, the fur lining, the way the pieces fit together. He didn't say anything for a long time. Ruth's heart was pounding so hard she thought she might be sick. Finally, Garrett looked at her. "You make this?" "Yes, sir." "All of it? The tanning, the cutting, the stitching?" Caleb did the tanning, I did the rest. Garrett looked at Caleb. "She always this good?" "Better." The old man grunted. Then he pulled out a leather pouch and counted out coins. More coins than Ruth had expected. More than she'd made in a month back in Red Hollow. "I'll take all of it," Garrett said. "And I'll take more if you can make it. I've got miners coming through here all summer who'd pay good money for quality gear." Ruth's voice came out barely a whisper. "You will?" "Hell yes, I will. This is the best work I've seen in 5 years. He looked at Caleb. "Where'd you find her?" "Red Hollow." "They must be idiots down there." "They are." Ruth felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back hard. "Thank you," she managed. Garrett waved her off. "Don't thank me. You earned it. Now get to work. I want 6 more coats by July." 6 coats. Ruth's mind was already racing. Materials, designs, time. She could do it. She would do it. They left the trading post with a pack full of supplies and Ruth's pockets full of coins. The walk home felt shorter somehow, lighter. "You were right," Ruth said. "About what?" "About me being good enough." Caleb took her hand. "I'm always right." "You're really not." "I'm right about you." Ruth smiled and didn't argue. That night, back at the cabin, she spread out the coins on the table and counted them 3 times. It was more money than she'd ever held at once. More than enough to buy fabric, tools, materials. More than enough to build something real. "What do you want to do with it?" Caleb asked. Ruth looked at him. At this man who'd believed in her when no one else did. Who'd given her a chance, a home, a life. "I want to save it," she said. I want to build something that lasts, something that's ours." "Ours," Caleb repeated, like he was testing the word. "I like that." "Me too." Spring turned into summer. The mountains exploded with green. Wildflowers covered the meadows. The streams ran clear and cold. Ruth sewed from sunup to sundown, working faster and better than she ever had in Red Hollow. No one was looking over her shoulder. No one was complaining about crooked hems or late deliveries. She was free to create. And create she did. By July, she had 8 coats finished. By August, 12. She made shirts and vests and gloves and anything else Garrett asked for. The money kept coming. Ruth and Caleb bought tools, seeds, a milk cow that Caleb complained about constantly but secretly loved. They expanded the cabin, adding a second room that Ruth claimed as her workshop. They were building something, not just surviving, building. In September, a letter came. Garrett sent it up with a trapper who was passing through. Ruth's name was on the front, written in handwriting she didn't recognize. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single page. The words were short, brutal. Caroline Pritchard was dead. Thrown from a horse. Broke her neck. Gone before the doctor even arrived. The letter was from her mother asking if Ruth would come to the funeral. Ruth read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and set it on the table. "You okay?" Caleb asked. "I don't know." "You want to go?" Ruth thought about it, about Caroline, about Red Hollow, about the woman she used to be, the one who would have gone out of obligation or guilt or some twisted sense of duty. "No," she said finally. "I don't want to go." "You sure?" "I'm sure. She spent her whole life trying to make me feel small. I'm not going to let her do it one more time, even in death." Caleb crossed the room and pulled her close. "At the end of it, then?" he asked. "Red Hollow, all of it." Ruth nodded against his chest. "That's the end of it." She burned the letter that night, watching the paper curl and blacken in the fire. Felt like closing a door. Like finally, truly, being free. Fall came fast. The leaves turned golden red. The air got crisp. The first frost came in early October. Ruth and Caleb spent the days preparing for winter. But this time was different. This time they were ready. The woodpile was twice as high. The root cellar was stocked full. Ruth had made them both new winter gear, warm and well-fitted and built to last. They were stronger, smarter, better prepared, and they had each other. One night in late October, Ruth realized her bleeding was late. She didn't say anything at first. Didn't want to get Caleb's hopes up, or her own, in case she was wrong. But a week passed. Then two. Finally, she told him. They were sitting by the fire, Caleb sharpening his knife, Ruth mending a tear in her work apron. "I think I'm pregnant." Caleb's hand slipped. The knife clattered to the floor. "You what?" "I think I'm pregnant. I'm not sure yet. But I'm late and I've been sick in the mornings," and he was across the room in 2 strides, pulling her up, holding her face in his hands. "You're sure?" "No, but I think so." A smile spread across his face, slow and disbelieving and full of something that looked like joy. "We're having a baby." "Maybe. Don't get too excited yet. I could be wrong." "You're not wrong." "Caleb," he kissed her, hard and desperate and grateful. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ruth saw tears in his eyes. "I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "A family. A real family. You have it now." "We have it now." Ruth smiled and pulled him close. Winter came again, but this time Ruth wasn't afraid. She was tired. Her body was changing in ways that surprised and sometimes scared her. The morning sickness was brutal. Her back ached constantly. She couldn't stand the smell of coffee anymore. But she was happy. Caleb hovered like a nervous hen, constantly asking if she was warm enough, rested enough, eating enough. "I'm fine," Ruth said for the 100th time. "You're carrying our child. You need to take it easy." "I am taking it easy. I'm sitting down." "You're sewing." "Sewing is sitting down." "Ruth," "Caleb, I love you. But if you ask me one more time if I'm okay, I'm going to stab you with this needle." He held up his hands in surrender. Message received. But he still watched her, still made sure she ate, still tucked extra blankets around her at night. Ruth let him. Because underneath the hovering was fear, and underneath the fear was love. And she loved him too, more than she'd ever thought possible. The baby came in early spring. The labor was long and brutal and terrifying. There was no doctor, no midwife, just Caleb, white-faced and shaking, doing his best to help while Ruth screamed and pushed and thought she might die. But she didn't die. And when the baby finally came, slippery and red and wailing loud enough to wake the mountains, Ruth felt something crack open in her chest. Love. Pure and fierce and overwhelming. Caleb cut the cord with shaking hands and wrapped the baby in a clean blanket Ruth had made months ago. "It's a girl," he said, voice breaking. Ruth held out her arms and he placed the baby in them. She was tiny, perfect, red-faced and furious at the world. "She's beautiful," Ruth whispered. "She's got your eyes. She's got your temper. Listen to her scream." Caleb laughed through tears. They named her Emma, after Ruth's mother, Emma Voss. Born in a cabin in the mountains, delivered by a father who'd never held a baby before, welcomed into a world that was hard and cold and unforgiving, but also beautiful, also free, also home. Ruth held her daughter and looked at Caleb and felt a kind of peace she'd never known. This was her life now. Not the one she'd planned, not the one she'd imagined, but the one she'd fought for, the one she'd earned. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Emma was 3 weeks old when she stopped screaming long enough for Ruth to sleep more than an hour at a time. Caleb had taken to walking her around the cabin at night, bouncing her gently and singing off-key songs he half remembered from childhood. Ruth would wake to the sound of his voice, rough and low, and the baby's quieting cries, and feel something tighten in her chest. Love. Exhaustion. Terror that she had no idea what she was doing. Motherhood was nothing like she'd imagined. It was messier, harder, more consuming than anything she'd done in the mountains, including surviving that first winter. Emma didn't care that Ruth was tired, Didn't care that her breasts ached or that her body still felt broken from the birth. The baby needed. Constantly. Endlessly. And Ruth gave. Because that's what you did. You need to rest, Caleb said one morning after Ruth had been up 3 times in the night. I'm fine. You're not. You're running on nothing. So are you. I'm used to it. Ruth looked at him, at the dark circles under his eyes, at the way he moved slower, more carefully, like he was carrying weight he couldn't put down. We're both a mess, she said. Yeah, we are. He poured her coffee. She drank it even though it still made her stomach turn. Emma woke up crying again. Ruth closed her eyes, took a breath, stood. I've got her, Caleb said. You always have her. Because you need to sleep. I can sleep later. Ruth, I'm her mother. Let me be her mother. She picked up the baby, settled her against her chest, and felt Emma root around, already hungry again. Caleb watched them for a long moment. Then he nodded and went outside to chop wood. The days blurred together after that. Ruth lost track of time. Morning and night stopped meaning anything. There was only the baby. Feed, change, soothe, sleep, repeat. Her sewing sat untouched in the corner. She'd promised Garrett 6 more coats by summer, but she couldn't even think about threading a needle. Her hands were full. Her mind was full. Everything was full. Caleb picked up the slack. He cooked. He cleaned. He kept the fire going and the water hauled and the traps checked. And somehow, they survived. One morning in early May, Ruth woke to silence. Not the bad kind. The good kind. She sat up, heart pounding, and looked around. Emma was asleep in the cradle Caleb had built. Peaceful, breathing steady. Caleb was at the table, mending one of Ruth's shirts with stitches, so crooked they made her want to cry and laugh at the same time. You're sewing, she said. Trying to. You make it look easier than it is. Let me see. He held up the shirt. The stitches were uneven, the thread knotted in 3 places, but he'd closed the tear. It's terrible, Ruth said. I know. But it works. That's all that matters, right? Ruth smiled. For the first time in weeks, it didn't feel forced. Yeah, that's all that matters. She got up, wincing at the pull in her back, and took the shirt from him. Fixed the worst of the stitches. Showed him how to tie off the thread properly. You're a terrible student, she said. You're a terrible teacher. I am not. You keep sighing like I'm personally offending you. Ruth laughed. Actually laughed. It felt good. Emma stirred in the cradle. Ruth tensed, waiting for the crying to start. It didn't. The baby yawned, made a small sound, and fell back asleep. I think she's starting to settle, Caleb said quietly. Don't jinx it. I'm just saying she's sleeping longer, crying less. It's been 3 weeks. And it's getting better. Ruth wanted to argue, wanted to say it wasn't better. It was still impossible, still overwhelming. But he was right. It was getting better, slowly, painfully, but better. The next weeks brought small victories that felt enormous. Emma would go 2 hours between feedings instead of 1. Then 3. Ruth started to recognize the difference between her hungry cry and her tired cry and her I just want to be held cry. She learned that Emma liked to be swaddled tight, that she calmed down faster when Ruth hummed, that she hated having her face washed but loved having her feet rubbed. These were small things, tiny details in the enormous task of keeping a human alive, but they mattered. By June, Emma was sleeping through most of the night. Ruth's body was starting to feel like her own again. She could think, could focus, could finally pick up her needle without wanting to throw it out the window. She started working again, just an hour or 2 a day at first, while Caleb watched Emma. Then longer as her hands remembered the rhythm, the movements, the pleasure of creating something beautiful. The first coat she finished wasn't her best work. The stitching was uneven in places. The fur wasn't as well matched as it should have been. But it was done, and it felt like winning. Caleb took it to Garrett in mid-July, along with 3 others Ruth had managed to finish. He came back with money and orders for more. He says you're the best he's ever worked with, Caleb reported. Says he's got miners lining up asking for your stuff specifically. Ruth was nursing Emma by the fire. She looked up, surprised. Really? Really? He wants to know if you can make pants. Heavy-duty work pants that won't tear. I can try. He'll pay double for them. Ruth's mind was already working. Design, materials, time. Tell him yes, she said. I'll have 6 pairs by fall. Caleb grinned. There's my girl. Emma finished nursing and promptly spit up all over Ruth's shoulder. Your daughter, Ruth said. She's only mine when she's making a mess. That's most of the time. Oh, exactly. Ruth cleaned up the mess and put Emma in the cradle. The baby was getting bigger, stronger. Her eyes were losing their newborn blue, turning darker. She grabbed at things now, smiled when she saw Caleb's face. She was becoming a person. Their person. Ruth stood at the window and looked out at the mountains, at the life they'd built here, the cabin, the garden Caleb had planted, the woodshed, the workshop. What are you thinking? Caleb asked, coming to stand behind her. That I'm happy, Ruth said. I didn't think I'd ever be able to say that, but I am. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulled her back against his chest. Me too. They stood there in silence, watching the sun set behind the peaks, turning the sky orange and pink and gold. Emma made a sound, not crying, just talking to herself, the way babies did. She's going to grow up so different from how we did, Ruth said. Good, she should. She won't know about Red Hollow, about the town, about any of it. What will she know? Ruth thought about it. She'll know the mountains. She'll know how to work with her hands. She'll know she's loved. That's more than most people get. I know. Caleb kissed the side of her neck. You're a good mother, Ruth. I'm trying. You're succeeding. Ruth leaned into him and let herself believe it. Summer passed in a blur of work and baby and life. Ruth finished the pants, then more coats, then gloves and vests and anything else Garrett asked for. The money kept coming, more than they needed, more than they could spend. They started saving it, putting it away in a tin box under the floorboards, planning for the future, for Emma's future. Caleb started talking about expanding the cabin again, adding a real bedroom for Emma, maybe even a separate building for Ruth's workshop. We could build something big, he said one night, something permanent. This is already permanent. Bigger then. Better. Why? He looked at her. Because we can. Because we've earned it. Ruth thought about the girl she used to be, the one who lived in a room barely big enough to turn around in, the one who worked herself to exhaustion for pennies and scraps. Yeah, she said. We have. They spent the rest of the summer planning, drawing rough sketches in the dirt, arguing about where to put walls and windows, making lists of materials they'd need. Emma crawled now, getting into everything. Ruth had to watch her constantly. The baby would head straight for the fire if given half a chance. She's fearless, Caleb said, scooping Emma up before she could grab a hot poker. She's going to give me a heart attack. She's exploring, that's good. Tell me that when she sets herself on fire. But Ruth was secretly pleased that her daughter wasn't afraid, that Emma approached the world with curiosity instead of caution. She'd grow up different, strong, unafraid, free. In September, a letter came. Ruth almost didn't open it. The last letter she'd gotten had been about Caroline's death, and she had no desire to hear from Red Hollow ever again. But this one was different. The handwriting was shaky, old. She opened it. Inside was a single page from Mrs. Brennan, the woman who'd run the boarding house where Caleb used to stay. She was dying. Cancer, the doctor said. Maybe 3 months left. She wanted to apologize for the way she'd treated Ruth, for the things she'd said, for standing by while the town tried to destroy her. She wanted Ruth to know that after Ruth left, things had changed. Not better, exactly, but different. The shop Ruth had burned became a reminder, a scar on the town's conscience. People stopped talking about her, stopped gossiping. Some even spoke up when someone tried to start. Caroline's death had shaken things too, made people think about cruelty and consequences. Mrs. Brennan's letter ended with a simple request, forgiveness. Ruth read it 3 times, then she folded it carefully and set it aside. You going to write back? Caleb asked. I don't know. You don't owe her anything. I know. Ruth looked at Emma, asleep in the cradle, at this perfect innocent thing she and Caleb had made. I don't want to carry anger anymore, she said quietly. I don't want Emma to grow up feeling the weight of what I went through. I want her to be free of it. Then let it go. It's not that simple. It is, though. You decide it's done, and then it's done. Ruth thought about that, about the power in choosing, about the freedom and forgiveness, not for them, but for herself. She picked up a pen and paper. The letter she wrote was short. She didn't absolve Mrs. Brennan, didn't say it was okay, but she thanked her for the apology. Said she was building a good life, said she hoped Mrs. Brennan found peace. She signed it Ruth Voss, not Calder. Voss, the woman she'd become. She sent the letter the next day and didn't think about it again. Fall turned to winter. Ruth and Caleb worked on the cabin expansion whenever the weather allowed. They built slowly, carefully, adding one wall at a time. Emma's first birthday came in early March. Ruth made a cake from dried fruit and honey. Emma smeared it all over her face and laughed. "Happy birthday, baby girl," Ruth whispered, holding her close. Emma patted Ruth's face with sticky hands. Caleb took a bite of cake and made a face. "This is terrible." "I know, I'm a better seamstress than a baker." "That's an understatement." Ruth threw a piece of cake at him. It hit him square in the chest. Emma laughed so hard she hiccuped. "Now look what you've done," Caleb said. "She thinks throwing food is funny. She's won." "Everything is funny." They spent the rest of the afternoon playing with Emma, watching her toddle around on unsteady legs, catching her before she fell. That night, after Emma was asleep, Ruth and Caleb sat by the fire. "She's growing up so fast," Ruth said. "They all do." "You say that like we're going to have more." Caleb looked at her. "You don't want more?" "I didn't say that, one is a lot. One is perfect, but two would be nice. Ask me again in a year." "Fair enough." But Ruth was already thinking about it, about another baby, another chance, another person to love. Maybe. Someday. Spring came slowly that year. The snow melted in fits and starts. The trails stayed muddy well into April, but finally the world opened up again. Green pushed through brown. Flowers bloomed. Birds returned. Emma was walking now, toddling around the cabin and the clearing beyond. She loved being outside. Would cry when they brought her in. "She's got your stubbornness," Caleb said, "and your temper. Listen to her scream." Emma was having a tantrum because Ruth had taken away a sharp rock she'd been trying to eat. "She'll grow out of it," Caleb said. "When?" "Eventually, probably." Ruth picked up Emma and held her close, letting the baby cry herself out against her shoulder. "It's okay, baby. I know you're mad, but you can't eat rocks." Emma's cries slowly subsided into hiccups and sniffles. Ruth carried her to the window and pointed at the mountains. "See that? That's your home. Those mountains, this cabin, Papa and me, that's your home." Emma put her head on Ruth's shoulder and stuck her thumb in her mouth. Ruth held her and rocked her and felt a surge of love so strong it hurt. This was everything. This moment, this child, this life. Everything. In late spring, Caleb finished the expansion. Emma now had her own small room off the main cabin. Ruth's workshop doubled in size. They stood outside and looked at what they'd built. "It's good," Caleb said. "It's more than good. It's beautiful. We did that. You and me." Ruth took his hand. "Yeah, we did." That summer brought more changes. Emma started talking in full sentences. Her vocabulary exploded. She asked questions constantly. "Why is the sky blue? Why do birds fly? Why can't I eat rocks?" Ruth answered as best she could. Some questions were easy. Some she had no idea how to answer. "Why don't I have a grandma?" Emma asked one day. Ruth went still. They were in the garden, Emma helping to pull weeds. "Because my mama died when I was young," Ruth said carefully. "Before you were born." "What about Papa's mama?" "She died too, a long time ago." Emma thought about this. "That's sad." "Yeah, baby, it is. But I have you and Papa." "You do." "That's good then." Ruth pulled Emma close and kissed the top of her head. "Yeah, baby. That's good." The business continued to grow. Ruth was getting orders from beyond just Garrett's trading post now. Word had spread. Trappers and miners and traders all wanted her work. She hired help for the first time that summer, a young woman named Margaret who'd come west with her husband and was looking for work. Margaret was quick and skilled. She could sew a straight seam and didn't need constant supervision. "You're hired," Ruth said after watching her work for an hour. "Just like that?" "Just like that." "Can you start tomorrow?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You don't know what this means." Ruth thought about the girl she used to be, the one who couldn't find work, who was turned away and overlooked. "I think I do," she said quietly. Having Margaret's help meant Ruth could take on more orders, make more money, spend more time with Emma. She taught Margaret everything she knew: how to cut patterns, how to match fur, how to reinforce stress points so the garments lasted longer. Margaret learned fast and worked hard. Within months, she was producing work almost as good as Ruth's. "You're a natural," Ruth told her. "I had a good teacher." By the end of summer, they were working side by side, Ruth's workshop full of the sound of needles and scissors and quiet conversation. It felt right. Having another woman to talk to, someone who understood the work, the craft. Margaret had stories too, hard ones. She'd left a family that didn't want her, married a man who sometimes drank too much, was trying to build a life out here because there was nowhere else to go. Ruth listened and didn't judge. Everyone had their struggles. Everyone was trying to survive. Fall came again. Emma was 18 months old now, running instead of walking, talking nonstop, getting into everything. She was fearless and curious and exhausting. Ruth loved her so much it scared her sometimes. One afternoon in October, Ruth realized her bleeding was late again. She didn't say anything at first, didn't want to get anyone's hopes up. But a week passed, then two. Finally, she told Caleb. They were in bed, Emma asleep in her room, the fire burning low. "I think I'm pregnant." Caleb went still. "You sure?" "Pretty sure. All the same signs as last time." He pulled her close. "How do you feel about it?" "Scared, excited, tired already." He laughed softly. "That's fair. You happy?" "Yeah, Ruth. I'm happy." She leaned into him and closed her eyes. "Me too." The pregnancy was easier than the first. Ruth knew what to expect now. Knew how to pace herself. Knew when to rest and when to push through. Margaret took on more of the work. Emma was old enough now to play by herself for longer stretches. Ruth's body changed again. Her belly grew. Her back ached. She couldn't stand the smell of coffee or fried meat, but she felt strong, capable, ready. Winter came and went. Ruth worked through most of it, her belly growing larger, her movements slower. Emma was fascinated by the baby. She'd put her hands on Ruth's stomach and squeal when she felt movement. "Baby kicking," she'd announce. "Yes, baby, the baby's kicking." "Why?" "Because the baby's getting strong." "Like me?" "Just like you." Emma would lean down and talk to Ruth's belly, telling the baby about the mountains and the snow and the elk in the valley. Ruth would listen and feel tears prick her eyes. Her daughter was going to be a good big sister. The baby came in early May. Another easier birth than the first. Faster, less terrifying. A boy this time. They named him James after Caleb's father, who died when Caleb was young. Emma met her brother an hour after he was born. She climbed onto the bed carefully, looking at the tiny bundle in Ruth's arms. "He's little," she said. "He is." "Can I hold him?" "When you're sitting down." Ruth helped Emma settle, then carefully placed James in her arms. Emma looked down at her brother with such love and wonder that Ruth had to look away before she started crying. "Hi, James," Emma whispered. "I'm your big sister. I'm going to show you everything." James yawned and made a small sound. Emma looked up at Ruth, eyes shining. "He likes me." "Of course he does, baby. You're his sister." Caleb stood in the doorway watching, and Ruth saw him wipe his eyes quickly. They were a family now. All four of them, complete. The months after James's birth were harder than after Emma's. Not because James was a difficult baby. He was easier than Emma had been, quieter, more content. But because Ruth had two children now, instead of one. Emma needed attention. James needed feeding. The house needed tending. The business needed running. Ruth felt pulled in 1,000 directions. Margaret stepped up, taking on even more of the sewing. Caleb took over most of the cooking and cleaning. Emma helped in her own way, fetching diapers and singing to James when he cried. They survived through teamwork, through taking turns, through accepting that some days the house would be a mess and dinner would be late, and that was okay. By the time James was 3 months old, they'd found their rhythm again. Ruth would work in the mornings while Caleb watched the children. In the afternoons, Caleb would check traps or chop wood while Ruth managed the house. Evenings were for family. All 4 of them together by the fire. Emma playing, James sleeping, Ruth and Caleb stealing moments of peace whenever they could. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and chaotic and exhausting, but it was theirs. Summer brought new challenges. James got colic and screamed for hours every evening. Emma went through a phase where she refused to eat anything except bread and dried apples. The cow got sick and stopped giving milk for 2 weeks. Ruth felt like she was drowning. "I can't do this," she told Caleb one night after both children were finally asleep. "Yes, you can." "No, I can't. I'm failing at everything. The business, the house, the kids, all of it." "You're not failing. Then why does it feel like I am?" Caleb pulled her close. "Because you're human. Because you're trying to do everything at once. Because you set impossible standards for yourself. Someone has to." "No. Someone has to be kind to themselves. Someone has to say, it's okay if the house is messy or dinner is late or work doesn't get done." "But, Ruth, look at what you've built. This business, this family, this life. You've done more in 5 years than most people do in a lifetime. Cut yourself some slack." Ruth leaned into him and let herself cry, not from sadness, from exhaustion and relief and the overwhelming weight of trying to be everything to everyone. "I'm tired," she whispered. "I know. I love them so much it hurts. I know. I don't want to mess them up. You won't." "How do you know?" "Because you love them. That's all that matters." Ruth wasn't sure she believed him, but she wanted to. By fall, things had settled again. James's colic passed. Emma started eating normally. The cow recovered. Ruth hired another helper, a young man named Thomas, who was good with his hands and didn't mind the repetitive work of preparing materials. With Margaret and Thomas both working, Ruth could focus on design and quality control, on being a mother, on actually sleeping occasionally. The business thrived, orders kept coming, money kept accumulating. They built a proper barn that winter, got another cow, planted a bigger garden the next spring. They were expanding, growing, building something that would last. Emma turned 3. She was talking in full paragraphs now, asking complicated questions Ruth didn't always know how to answer. "Why do we live in the mountains?" "Because Papa likes it here." "Why?" "Because it's quiet and beautiful." "Why?" "I don't know, baby. Some things just are." James started walking. He was quieter than Emma had been at that age, more observant. He'd sit for hours watching Ruth sew, fascinated by the needle and thread. "He's going to be a craftsman," Caleb predicted. "Maybe. Or maybe he'll want to do something completely different." "Like what?" "I don't know. Anything. Everything. He can be whatever he wants. As long as he's happy." "As long as he's happy," Ruth agreed. They celebrated another winter, another spring, another cycle of life in the mountains. Ruth was 30 now. Caleb was 35. They'd been together 6 years, married for 5. Felt like both forever and no time at all. One morning in early summer, Margaret came to Ruth with news. "I'm pregnant," she said. Ruth hugged her. "That's wonderful." "I'm scared. I don't know if I can keep working." "You'll work as long as you want to and not a day longer. And when you're ready to come back, you come back. Simple as that." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. You earned your place here. This is your job as long as you want it." Margaret worked through most of her pregnancy, finally stopping in her 8th month. Ruth gave her a month's pay as a gift and told her to come back whenever she was ready. "You're too generous," Caleb said. "I'm practical. Margaret's good. I don't want to lose her." "That's not why you did it." Ruth smiled. "No, it's not. She did it because she remembered. Remembered being the woman with nothing, the one who needed help and didn't get it. She'd sworn then that if she ever had the chance, she'd be different. She was keeping that promise. In September, Margaret had a girl. Ruth visited a week later, bringing food and clothes and a quilt she'd made. Margaret held her daughter and cried. "I never thought I'd have this," she said. "A baby, a friend, a life that feels safe." "You deserve it," Ruth told her. "So do you." Ruth looked around Margaret's small cabin, at the life this woman was building with her husband, at the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Yeah," Ruth said, "I guess we both do." That fall, Emma started showing real interest in sewing. She'd sit next to Ruth and try to thread needles with her small fingers. Most of the time, she just made a mess, but sometimes, with Ruth's help, she'd manage a few crooked stitches. "Look, Mama, I did it." "You did, baby. Good job." Emma beamed with pride. Ruth watched her daughter work and felt something shift in her chest. Emma was learning, growing, becoming her own person. And Ruth got to watch it happen. What a gift. Winter came again, their 7th winter in the mountains. Ruth barely recognized the woman she used to be. The scared girl from Red Hollow felt like a character from a story, someone else's life. This was her life now. These children, this man, this mountain. This was real. When Emma was 4 and James was 2, Ruth got pregnant again. She hadn't planned it, hadn't expected it. But there it was. "Third time's the charm?" Caleb said when she told him. "Or third time's insanity?" "That too." But they were both happy about it, ready for it. Their family would grow again. The pregnancy was the hardest yet. Ruth was older now, more tired. Her body didn't bounce back as fast. But she managed, with Caleb's help, with Margaret back working part-time, with Emma entertaining James when Ruth needed to rest. They all worked together. That's what families did. The baby came in late summer. Another girl. They named her Sarah, after the woman Ruth had helped years ago. Sarah was tiny, quiet, content to sleep and eat and not much else. Emma was fascinated. James was indifferent. He was more interested in the horses than the baby. "He'll come around," Caleb said, "or he won't, and that's okay too." Ruth held Sarah and marveled at how different each child was. Emma had been fierce from day one. James was thoughtful, careful. Sarah seemed peaceful, like she'd already figured out some secret the rest of them were missing. 3 children. 3 whole people Ruth was responsible for keeping alive and healthy and happy. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. The years began to blur after that, each one bringing new challenges, new joys, new moments that made Ruth's heart swell or break, or both at once. Emma started reading. James learned to ride. Sarah took her first steps. The business continued to grow. Ruth had 4 employees now. The workshop was twice the size it had been when she started. They built another addition onto the cabin. More bedrooms, a real kitchen, space to breathe. They bought more land, more animals, planted orchards and vegetable gardens that could feed a small village. They were prospering, not just surviving, prospering. When Emma was 7, she asked about Red Hollow for the first time. Really asked, not just the sanitized story Ruth had been telling, the whole truth. Ruth and Caleb sat her down one evening after the younger children were asleep. They told her everything. The cruelty, the fire, the choice Ruth had made to leave everything behind. Emma listened quietly. When they finished, she was quiet for a long time. "They were mean to you because you were different?" she finally asked. "No," Ruth said. "They were mean to me because they were afraid. Of change. Of anything that didn't fit their idea of how things should be." "That's stupid." "Yes, it is. Are you glad you left?" Ruth looked around the cabin, at Caleb, at Emma, at the life they'd built. "Every single day," she said. Emma nodded, then she hugged Ruth tight. "I'm glad you left too. Otherwise, I wouldn't exist." Ruth felt tears sting her eyes. "No, baby, you wouldn't." "Then I guess something good came from something bad." "Yeah, I guess it did." The conversation changed something in Emma. She seemed to understand better why hard work mattered, why kindness mattered, why standing up for yourself mattered. She started helping more around the cabin, started taking her responsibilities seriously. Ruth watched her daughter grow and felt proud. When Emma was 10, she asked to learn the business properly. "I want to know how to do what you do," she said. "Not just sew, but run things, make decisions." Ruth felt a surge of emotion so strong she had to sit down. You sure? I'm sure. You built something amazing, Mama. I want to help. So Ruth taught her how to manage inventory, how to price goods, how to negotiate with difficult customers. Emma absorbed it all like a sponge. James, meanwhile, showed no interest in sewing. He liked working with his hands, but in different ways. He helped Caleb with the animals, learned to hunt and track, spent hours in the woods observing wildlife. He's going to be a naturalist, Caleb said. What's that? Someone who studies animals and plants, someone who understands the wild. There's a job for that? There will be. For him, anyway. Sarah was the unexpected artist. She drew constantly, on any scrap of paper she could find. Pictures of the cabin, the mountains, her siblings, the animals. Ruth watched her youngest daughter create and felt a strange sense of completion. All three of her children were finding their own paths, becoming their own people. She'd done that, given them the freedom to be whoever they wanted to be. When Emma was 12, Ruth started teaching her advanced techniques. How to work with leather, how to design custom pieces, how to turn someone's vague idea into something concrete and beautiful. Emma picked it up quickly. Her stitches were neater than Ruth's had been at that age. Her eye for design was sharp. You're going to be better than me, Ruth said one afternoon. I'm already better than you, Emma replied with a grin. Ruth threw a scrap of fabric at her. Confidence is good. Arrogance is annoying. You taught me confidence. I did, but I also taught you humility. Can't I have both? Yeah, baby, you can have both. When Ruth was 40, Caleb surprised her with a trip. Just the two of them, a whole week away from the cabin. Margaret and her husband would stay with the children. Are you sure about this? Ruth asked. I'm sure. We haven't had time alone in years. We deserve it. They rode south into the lowlands to a small town Ruth had never seen. They stayed in a real hotel with a real bed and running water and electricity. It felt strange, foreign, too much noise, too many people, but it was nice to sleep without listening for children, to eat meals someone else cooked, to just be Caleb and Ruth again, not Mama and Papa. One night they sat on the hotel balcony and watched the street below. You ever miss it? Caleb asked. Town life, civilization. No, never. Not even a little? Ruth thought about it. Sometimes I miss having other women to talk to, people who understand things. But that's it. Everything else about town life I can do without. We could move, if you wanted, get closer to people. Is that what you want? I want whatever makes you happy. Ruth looked at him, at this man who'd given her everything, who'd saved her without even trying. I'm happy where we are, she said. I'm happy with you, with our kids, with our life. I don't need anything else. Caleb smiled and pulled her close. Good, because I wasn't actually planning on moving. That cabin's perfect. Ruth laughed and kissed him. They went back to the mountains after a week, back to the noise and chaos of 3 children and a business and a life that never stopped demanding things. And Ruth had never been so happy to be home. The years continued to pass. Emma became a teenager, moody and dramatic and brilliant. James grew quiet and serious, spending more time in the woods than in the cabin. Sarah blossomed into a creative soul, always drawing or painting or making something with her hands. Ruth watched them grow and felt time slipping through her fingers like water, too fast. It was all happening too fast. When Emma was 16, she told Ruth she wanted to take over the business. Not now, Emma clarified, but someday, when you're ready to slow down. Ruth felt pride and loss in equal measure. Her daughter was ready to step up, ready to carry on what Ruth had built. But it also meant Ruth was getting older, that her time of doing was slowly shifting into her time of teaching and then eventually stepping back. I'd like that, Ruth said, when the time comes. You'll teach me everything? Everything I know. They shook hands solemnly, sealing the deal. That year, Ruth began the transition, teaching Emma the final pieces. How to manage people, how to handle difficult customers, how to make decisions that balanced profit with integrity. Emma learned quickly. By the end of the year, she was handling half the business decisions. By the next year, she was handling most of them. Ruth found herself with more free time than she'd had in years. She spent it with Caleb, with James and Sarah, in the garden, in the mountains, doing things just because she wanted to, not because she had to. It felt strange at first, almost guilty. But slowly, she adjusted. This was the next phase of life, the letting go phase. And it was okay. When Ruth was 45, word came that Red Hollow had burned. Not just her old shop, the whole town. A fire started in the saloon and spread before anyone could stop it. Most people got out. A few didn't, including Mrs. Garrett, the woman who'd complained about Ruth's crooked hems. Ruth read the letter and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief, just distance. That town had stopped mattering to her years ago. "You okay?" Caleb asked. "Yeah, I am." "You sure?" "I'm sure. That was another life, another person. It doesn't touch me anymore." She burned the letter and went back to work. Emma took over the business completely when she was 18. Ruth officially stepped down, though she still helped with designs and complicated pieces. It felt right. Watching her daughter run things. Watching Emma make her own decisions, her own mistakes, her own successes. Ruth had built something that would outlast her. That mattered. James left when he was 17. Not forever, just for a year. He wanted to see more of the world. Study with a naturalist 3 territories over. Ruth hugged him tight and let him go. "Come back when you're ready," she said. "I will. I promise." He did come back. A year later, full of stories and knowledge and new ideas. He built a small cabin on the edge of their property and started his own life. Studying animals, writing about them, creating field guides that traders and trappers actually used. Ruth watched her son become an expert in something she barely understood and felt overwhelming pride. Sarah stayed close to home. She helped with the business in her own way, creating beautiful sketches and designs that Emma turned into actual garments. The 3 of them worked together, each contributing their own skills, each carrying on the legacy Ruth had started. When Ruth was 50, she and Caleb took another trip, this time to the valley where the elk gathered, the place where Caleb had told Ruth he loved her all those years ago. They stood on the ridge and looked out at the herd below. "You ever regret it?" Ruth asked. "Choosing me?" Caleb looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Not for 1 second. Even when things were hard, especially when things were hard, you never gave up, Ruth. You never stopped fighting. That's what I love about you." Ruth leaned into him. "I love you too, you stubborn old man." "I'm not old. You're 55. That's not old. It's not young either. I can still outwork you any day." "Probably, but that's because I'm smart enough to delegate now." Caleb laughed and pulled her close. They watched the elk move across the valley, just like they had 20 years ago. Everything had changed. Nothing had changed. Ruth thought about the girl she used to be, the invisible seamstress from Red Hollow who thought she'd never matter to anyone. That girl couldn't have imagined this life, this family, this sense of purpose and belonging. But Ruth had always been capable of it. She'd just needed someone to show her. Or maybe she'd needed to show herself. When Ruth was 55, Emma got married. To a trader who came through twice a year. A good man who made Emma laugh and didn't try to change her. The wedding was small, just family and a few close friends. They held it in the clearing outside the cabin, with the mountains as witnesses. Ruth watched her daughter make vows and felt her heart swell. Emma would be okay. She'd found someone who saw her, who valued her, just like Caleb had done for Ruth. History repeating itself in the best possible way. James never married. He seemed content with his work, his solitude, his life among the trees and animals. Ruth worried about him sometimes, but Caleb reminded her that not everyone needed the same things. "He's happy," Caleb said. "That's what matters." Sarah got married when she was 22, to another artist she'd met at the trading post. They moved to a small town 50 miles away where they could sell their work. Ruth cried when Sarah left. Happy tears and sad tears mixed together. All her children were grown, living their own lives, making their own choices. She'd done her job. When Ruth was 60, she handed over the last of the business operations to Emma. "It's all yours now," Ruth said. "You sure?" "I'm sure. I'm tired, baby. It's time." Emma hugged her tight. "Thank you for everything, for teaching me, for building this, for showing me what's possible." Ruth cried then, couldn't help it. She'd done it. Built something that mattered, something that would last. Not just a business, a legacy. Ruth spent her 60s slowing down. She still sewed sometimes, but only for pleasure. Only when the mood struck. She spent time with her grandchildren. Emma had 3. James had none, but seemed to have adopted half the forest animals. Sarah had 2. Ruth taught her grandchildren the things she'd taught her own children. How to work with their hands. How to stand up for themselves. How to be kind but strong. Caleb slowed down too. His joints ached more. His hair went completely white. But he was still strong. Still capable. They'd sit by the fire at night and talk about everything and nothing, about the life they'd built, the children they'd raised, the years they'd survived together. Any regrets? Ruth asked one night. None. You? Not a single one. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the fire burn. When Ruth was 65, Caleb got sick. Not terribly sick. Not dying sick. But sick enough that he couldn't work like he used to. Couldn't do the things he'd always done. It frustrated him, made him irritable. Ruth dealt with it patiently. She'd been taking care of people her whole life. One more wasn't going to break her. I hate being useless, Caleb grumbled one afternoon. You're not useless. I can't chop wood anymore. James chops wood. That's his job now. I should be able to do it. You're 68 years old. You've earned the right to slow down. I don't want to slow down. Ruth sat beside him and took his hand. I know. But sometimes we don't get a choice. Sometimes we just have to accept where we are and make the best of it. Caleb sighed. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention. He smiled despite himself. Caleb recovered slowly. By spring, he was back to doing light work. Not what he used to do, but enough to feel useful. Ruth watched him carefully. Made sure he didn't overdo it. Made sure he rested when he needed to. They took care of each other now. That's what partners did. When Ruth was 70, she stood on the ridge overlooking the valley one last time. Caleb was beside her, older now, grayer, but still hers. You remember the first time we came here? Ruth asked. Of course. I told you I loved you. And I told you I loved you back. Best decision I ever made. Ruth smiled. Asking me to come with you? No, falling in love with you in the first place. Ruth leaned into him and watched the elk move across the valley below. She thought about everything that had happened since that day. The children, the business, the life they'd built together. You ever wonder what would have happened if I'd said no? Ruth asked. If I'd stayed in Red Hollow? Every day for the first year. Then I stopped wondering because you were here and that's all that mattered. I would have survived if I'd stayed. I know. But I wouldn't have lived, not really. I know that too. Ruth thought about the girl she used to be. The invisible seamstress who thought she'd never be more than forgotten. That girl had been wrong. She'd always been somebody. She just needed the space to prove it. The mountains had given her that space. Caleb had given her that space. But mostly, she'd given it to herself. I'm glad I came, Ruth said quietly. So am I. They stood there until the sun set, turning the sky orange and pink and gold. Then they walked home together, hand in hand, two old people who'd survived everything life threw at them and come out stronger on the other side. Ruth Voss had been invisible once, overlooked, forgotten, dismissed. But she'd transformed herself into something nobody could ignore. Not through loudness or force or demanding to be seen, through quiet strength, through refusing to give up, through building a life worth living one day at a time. She'd raised children who knew their worth, built a business that provided for dozens of families, created beauty in a harsh world. She'd loved deeply, fought hard, survived longer than anyone thought possible. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.